October 27th, 2011, 9:47 in the morning, Cologne Regional Court, Germany. The oak-paneled courtroom falls silent as the judge adjusts his reading glasses. In the defendant's box, Wolfgang Beltracchi sits perfectly still, his painter's hands folded on the table. Beside him, his wife Helena stares straight ahead. After 16 years, their elaborate game is finally over. The judge begins reading the verdict. Fraud. 14 counts. Millions of dollars. The art world's most sophisticated deception in modern history. But here's what makes this moment extraordinary. As the sentence is announced, 6 years for Wolfgang, 4 for Helena, something strange happens. Wolfgang doesn't look defeated. He looks satisfied, almost proud, because sitting in that courtroom, Wolfgang knows something the judge doesn't. The 14 paintings they're being convicted for? That's just what they could prove. The real number is believed to be in the hundreds, and dozens of his masterful forgeries are still hanging in museums and private collections around the world right now. Paintings that experts have authenticated. Paintings that will probably never be discovered. How did a small-town German painter manage to fool the entire art establishment for nearly 2 decades? And more importantly, what does his success reveal about the industry that celebrated him? Wolfgang Beltracchi was born Wolfgang Fischer in 1951 in Höxter, a small town in northwestern Germany. His father was a church decorator and restorer, a man who spent his days bringing faded religious paintings back to life. From the age of 14, Wolfgang would sit beside his father, watching him mix pigments with the precision of a chemist and apply them with the intuition of a surgeon. The elder Fischer taught his son something that most art schools never cover: how to see paint not just as color, but as chemistry. How different pigments aged, how varnish yellowed over decades, how canvas texture changed with time. By 17, Wolfgang could restore a 17th century painting so seamlessly that even his father couldn't identify his work. But restoration bored him. He wanted to create. Wolfgang enrolled in art school in Aachen, but dropped out within a year. The rigid academic structure felt suffocating to someone who could already paint in virtually any style. He drifted through the 1970s and 80s as part of Germany's bohemian counterculture. Long hair, commune living, experimenting with everything. He painted constantly, in the style of Picasso one week, Max Ernst the next, Heinrich Campendonk after that. He wasn't copying specific works. He was absorbing the artistic DNA of these masters, learning to think like they thought, see like they saw. Here's what made Wolfgang different from typical forgers. Most forgers choose a famous existing painting and try to replicate it. Wolfgang did something far more audacious. He painted entirely new works that these artists never actually created, but theoretically could have. He wasn't copying masterpieces. He was creating them. But talent alone doesn't pay bills. Throughout the 1980s, Wolfgang sold his homages to flea markets and small dealers for modest sums. Then he met Helena. Helena Beltracchi wasn't just beautiful, she was strategic. A failed actress turned antique dealer, she understood something Wolfgang didn't. In the art world, provenance matters more than paint. A mediocre painting with a compelling backstory sells for more than a masterpiece with no history. Helena looked at Wolfgang's incredible technical abilities and saw not just art, but opportunity. She began researching gaps in art history, painters whose catalogs were incomplete, whose works had been lost to war and time. And she found the perfect cover story. During the Nazi era, countless artworks were seized from Jewish collectors and dealers. Many were destroyed. Many simply vanished. The chaos of that period left massive gaps in art historical records. Gaps that a clever couple might exploit. Helena constructed an elaborate fiction. Her grandfather, Werner Jaeger, she claimed, had been friends with Alfred Fleckheim, a prominent Jewish art dealer who fled Nazi Germany in the 1930s. Before Fleckheim's galleries were seized, he supposedly entrusted part of his collection to Jaeger for safekeeping. Now, decades later, this Jaeger collection was being passed down to Helena and her sister Jeanette. It was the perfect lie. Who could disprove a story about art hidden from the Nazis? The emotional weight of that history made people want to believe it. These weren't just paintings, they were survivors of the Holocaust. Wolfgang provided the art, Helena provided the story. Together, they created something neither could achieve alone. The Beltracchi operation wasn't improvised. It was engineered with the precision of a heist. The canvas problem. Modern canvas is too uniform, too perfect. Wolfgang needed authentic period materials. He spent years scouring European flea markets for worthless old paintings, religious scenes, amateur landscapes, anything from the right era. He would carefully remove the existing paint, preserving the aged canvas beneath. Each canvas told its own story through its weave pattern, its stretcher marks, its accumulated patina of decades. A forensic examiner would see exactly what they expected. Materials consistent with the early 20th century. The paint problem. This is where Wolfgang's father's training became invaluable. He couldn't use modern acrylic paints. They didn't exist in the 1920s and would be immediately detected. He learned to grind his own pigments using traditional methods. Linseed oil, natural earth colors, hand-mixed mediums. He studied how different painters of the era worked. Max Ernst used thick impasto in certain periods, thin washes in others. Campendonk favored specific blue tones. Every detail had to be historically accurate. Wolfgang's research was obsessive. He would spend months studying a painter's technique before attempting a single brushstroke. He analyzed photographs, read letters, visited museums. By the time he touched brush to canvas, he wasn't imitating, he was channeling. The authentication problem. In the art world, authentication is surprisingly subjective. There's no DNA test for creativity. Instead, the system relies on experts, academics and dealers who have spent their careers studying specific artists. Their word is gospel. The Beltracchis identified two key experts, Andrea Firmenich, compiler of the Campendonk catalog, and Werner Spies, the world's leading authority on Max Ernst. If these experts authenticated a painting, no one would question it. So the Beltracchis made sure their paintings would pass expert scrutiny. They studied what these specific experts looked for. They created works that fit neatly into documented gaps in artists' catalogs. They even crafted paintings that explained mysterious references in letters or photographs. The documentation problem. Here's where Helena's genius shone brightest. Every great collection needs documentation. Photographs, letters, provenance records. The Beltracchis had none of these. So they manufactured them. Helena dressed in her grandmother's vintage clothing. Wolfgang arranged several of his forgeries on a kitchen wall, carefully staged to look like a collector's home in the 1930s. Using a period-appropriate camera and pre-war developing paper, they created a single photograph. The image was intentionally slightly out of focus, enough to hide Helena's modern features, but clear enough to show the paintings. When experts examined this family photo, they saw exactly what they wanted to see. Visual proof that the Jaeger collection had existed for decades. But perhaps the most ingenious touch was the labels. Wolfgang created small authentication stickers bearing Alfred Fleckheim's seal, which he affixed to the backs of paintings. These labels provided tangible proof, connecting the works to the legitimate Fleckheim collection. The distribution system. The Beltracchis never sold directly to auction houses. That would attract too much scrutiny. Instead, they built a distribution network. Helena and her sister Jeanette would approach different galleries and dealers, each presenting herself as a modest inheritor, simply liquidating family assets. A friend named Otto Schulte Kellinghaus handled other transactions. By using multiple front people, they avoided creating a suspicious pattern. The paintings entered the market gradually, each sale reinforcing the legitimacy of the collection. When Christie's authenticated one Campendonk, it made the next one easier to sell. Success bred success. The pricing strategy. Wolfgang was careful never to aim too high. He avoided the absolute top tier of artists, no Picassos, no Van Goghs, where scrutiny would be most intense. Instead, he focused on accomplished but second-tier German expressionists whose works commanded hundreds of thousands, occasionally millions. This sweet spot meant significant profits with minimal attention. A $500,000 Campendonk attracted less investigation than a $50 million Monet. By 2008, the Beltracchis had accumulated an estimated $45 million. They owned properties in Germany and France. They drove luxury cars. They sent their children to private schools, and nobody suspected a thing. If you're wondering how this elaborate scheme could possibly have worked for 16 years, you're not alone. But what happens next reveals something even more shocking about the art world than the forgeries themselves. Subscribe if you haven't already, because this story gets wilder. For years, Wolfgang operated with near impunity. The close calls were few. In 1995, a German collector grew suspicious about some Johannes Molzahn paintings he'd purchased years earlier. Scientific analysis revealed they contained pigments unavailable when the works were supposedly created. Police launched an investigation. The trail led to Wolfgang's circle, but before investigators could close in, the statute of limitations expired. Wolfgang had escaped, this time. After that scare, Wolfgang and Helena packed their family into a motorhome and relocated from Germany to southern France. They claimed their daughter had health issues requiring a different climate. Convenient timing. For another decade, the operation continued from their new base. Helena and Jeanette traveled throughout Europe, delivering paintings to galleries in London, Munich, Cologne. Each sale added to their fortune. Each authentication reinforced their credibility. Then came 2006, and a single painting called Red Picture with Horses. Wolfgang had titled this work after a real Heinrich Campendonk painting that had been lost to history. Using historical references, he imagined what such a painting might have looked like, and created his own version. The painting sold at auction for over $3 million to Tresteco, a Maltese investment company. It was one of Wolfgang's biggest single sales, but Tresteco's lawyers demanded something that previous buyers hadn't: an official certificate of authenticity. The auction house couldn't provide one. Concerned, Tresteco commissioned their own analysis. They contacted Andrea Firmenich, the same Campendonk expert who had authenticated Wolfgang's earlier forgeries. This time, with $3 million on the line, she decided to dig deeper. Firmenich examined the small label on the painting's back, the Flecktime authentication sticker Wolfgang had created. She sent photographs to Ralph Jentsch, a scholar specializing in Alfred Flecktime's life and collection. Jentsch's reaction was immediate. The label was absurd. He had seen dozens of authentic Flecktime labels, and this cartoonish caricature looked nothing like them. It was obviously fake. Now suspicious, Firmenich ordered comprehensive scientific testing on the paint itself. The results were devastating. Wolfgang had made one catastrophic mistake. Among his hand-mixed pigments, he had used titanium white. It's a standard color found in every modern art supply store. But titanium white wasn't commercially available until the 1920s. And this particular formulation wasn't available until the 1930s. For a painting supposedly created in 1914, the presence of titanium white was a fatal flaw. It was like finding a smartphone in a medieval portrait. And here's the brutal irony. This is Art History 101. Any first-year conservation student knows about titanium white dating. Wolfgang, for all his obsessive research into brushwork and composition, had overlooked the most basic forensic test. Firmenich contacted Tresteco with her findings. The company immediately sued the auction house to recover their $3 million. The case drew attention. Meanwhile, Ralph Jentsch began his own investigation. Over 2 weeks, he identified 15 other paintings bearing identical fake Flecktime labels, all supposedly from the Jaeger collection, all authenticated by experts who never bothered to question the documentation. And with more scrutiny, the story Helena once gave also began to fall apart. It turned out that Werner Jaeger was just a teenager when Flecktime's gallery was seized. And to make the story even more implausible, Jaeger grew up to join the Nazi Party, making it incredibly unlikely he would have befriended a Jewish man like Flecktime. With the evidence stacking up, Ralph Jentsch took his findings to German police. A criminal case was opened. Investigators traced the sales network backward. The auction houses had acquired paintings through various dealers. Those dealers had purchased from Helena, Jeanette, and Otto. For the first time, police wiretapped the suspects' phones. They heard conversations confirming Wolfgang's central role. They documented the network's operations. German authorities prepared to raid the Beltracchi's French estate, but they needed cooperation from French police. And here's where the story takes an almost comedic turn. The French courts were on vacation. No judges were available to authorize the raid. The bureaucracy of August in France, when the entire country essentially shuts down, delayed the international operation. But the Beltracchis also owned property in Germany. In Freiburg, investigators found a luxurious villa overlooking the city. They waited. In August 2010, Wolfgang and Helena returned to their German home. Police stopped their car on a rain-slicked road, weapons drawn. Officers ordered them out. Their children watched from the back seat as their parents were taken into custody. Simultaneously, police arrested Helena's sister Jeanette, as well as Otto, the other friend helping the operation. The game was finally over. The prosecution faced an unexpected challenge. They could prove fraud, the fake labels, the manufactured provenance, the false identities, but they couldn't definitively prove who painted the forgeries. Wolfgang's studio had been in France, outside German jurisdiction. No one had witnessed him creating the fakes. The physical evidence was circumstantial. Prosecutors had a choice: pursue a lengthy trial with uncertain outcome, or negotiate a plea agreement with guaranteed convictions. Both sides chose pragmatism. In October 2011, Wolfgang, Helena, Jeanette, and Otto pleaded guilty to charges of fraud involving 14 paintings. Wolfgang received 6 years, Helena received 4, Otto got 4. Jeanette received a suspended sentence. But here's the twist that no one expected. German law allows for open prison sentences for non-violent offenders. This meant that 5 days a week, the Beltracchis were released to work during the day, returning to prison only at night and on weekends. What did Wolfgang do with his daytime freedom? He painted, legally this time. He gave interviews. He appeared in documentaries. He became, improbably, a celebrity. The art forger who had exposed the pretensions of the art world became a media darling. And then there's the matter of the unknown paintings. During his trial, Wolfgang made a remarkable admission. The 14 paintings in the indictment represented only a fraction of his output. There were dozens more, possibly hundreds, still circulating in the art world, still hanging in museums, still authenticated as genuine. He knows exactly which ones. He's seen some of them in prestigious collections, and he refuses to identify them. Why? Because legally, he can't be charged for crimes he's already served time for, and revealing which paintings are fake would devastate collectors who paid millions for them. Some prefer not to know. So somewhere in the world's great museums and private collections, Wolfgang Beltracchi's work hangs beside genuine masterpieces. And unless someone decides to test every painting in existence, they'll stay there indefinitely. Silent testaments to the art world's failure. Wolfgang was released on parole in 2015, having served roughly half his sentence. Helena was released around the same time. They returned to a strange kind of fame. Their story became a Netflix documentary. Wolfgang appeared on talk shows across Europe. Art collectors who had purchased his forgeries, including actor Steve Martin, who paid $860,000 for a fake Campendonk, found themselves objects of public sympathy or mockery, depending on your perspective. The financial aftermath was complicated. Courts ordered the Beltracchis to pay approximately $28 million in restitution. Much of their seized property went toward this debt. But remarkably, they weren't left destitute, because now Wolfgang sells paintings under his own name. His notoriety has made him a legitimate art market commodity. The very story of his fraud has become his provenance. A Beltracchi original, meaning a painting he openly created as himself, sells for substantial sums precisely because of who he is. The same art world he deceived now celebrates him. Galleries display his work. Collectors seek his signature. The irony is almost too perfect. Meanwhile, the experts who authenticated his forgeries face their own reckonings. Andrea Firmanich's reputation never fully recovered. Werner Spies, who had authenticated 7 fake Max Ernst paintings, was publicly humiliated. The auction houses claimed they were victims too, though critics pointed out that their business model discouraged rigorous authentication. Every delay in selling a painting costs money. Every rejected work means lost commission. The financial incentives push toward credulity. Conservative estimates suggest Wolfgang earned $45 million over his career as a forger. He served roughly 5 years in an open prison. He emerged as a celebrity. By any rational calculation, his gamble paid off handsomely. When you strip away the drama, Wolfgang Beltracchi's story asks a simple question. What are we actually paying for when we buy art? If a painting is beautiful enough to fool the world's greatest experts, does discovering its true origin actually change what it is? The canvas is the same. The brushstrokes are identical. The only thing that changed is a story. The art world insists that authenticity matters absolutely. But Wolfgang proved that authenticity is largely a collective fiction. A story we agree to believe because believing it makes certain people very wealthy. He didn't forge paintings, he forged belief. Maybe that's why so many people quietly root for him. Not because fraud is admirable, but because he exposed something uncomfortable. An industry that values names over beauty, provenance over paint, stories over substance. The question remains, did Wolfgang expose the art world's hypocrisy, or simply exploit it for personal gain? Perhaps both. Perhaps that's what makes his story so unsettling, and so impossible to look away from. If stories like this fascinate you, watch our video on the greatest heist in art history, a theft that makes Wolfgang's fraud look like a warm-up act.